From the Bay Bridge and the Hayden Bridge to the harbor crossings, from the Intercounty Connector to the new I-95 Express toll lanes, our toll tax rollback will ease the squeeze and make travel less expensive for struggling Marylanders.
Baltimore City in the national spotlight and in crisis mode as the murder rate hits record highs.
At this time last year, there were 71 homicides. So far in 2015, there have been 100.
A total of 191 people have been killed so far this year in the city of Baltimore. 116 of them have died between May and July. Police launching a 2-month partnership, so-called, that will see 10 federal agents embedded with the city's homicide detectives.
The Red Line, described as an expansion to the existing light rail system that would run from Woodlawn to Bayview Hospital. It's a project that's been years in the making. Its manager says they are now closer than ever with the 19-stop Red Line fully engineered and ready to go to bid.
The governor says that the Red Line project in Baltimore is too expensive, would cost $2.9 billion to build.
There's no place in the state where we invest more money than Baltimore City. The reason you don't see transportation projects here because there aren't state highways in the city of Baltimore.
Now the governor did approve money for the Purple Line. That's a train that would connect Prince George's and Montgomery County.
Going forward, the United States will reestablish an embassy in Havana, and high-ranking officials will visit Cuba.
This president is the single worst negotiator we have had in the White House in my lifetime, who has basically given the Cuban government everything it asked for and received no assurances of any advances in democracy and freedom in return.
I believe that it is misguided and fails to understand the nature of the regime in Cuba that has exerted its authoritarian control over the Cuban people for 55 years. No one wishes that the reality in Cuba was more different than the Cuban people and the Cuban American community that has fled the island in search of freedom.
And good morning. We have an NBC News special report. We have breaking news coming from the U.S. Supreme Court.
Historic ruling here, but the court has gone the whole way, said there is an absolute constitutional right to same-sex marriage. Now, what this means is that it is now the law of the land.
In fact, the day she was killed, we were walking arm in arm on Pier 14 in San Francisco, enjoying a wonderful day together. Suddenly, a shot rang out. Kate fell and looked at me and said, "Help me, Dad."
The term sanctuary city refers to local governments who limit its assistance in federal immigration enforcement. The local policies instruct city employees and law enforcement to not ask the immigration status of criminal suspects. By ignoring a criminal's immigration status, it effectively shields convicted criminals from deportation, releasing some back into the community. More than 200 cities and counties in the United States have policies that make them immigration sanctuaries. The report concluded that sanctuary policies caused the release of more than 8,000 criminally convicted illegal immigrants.
Old Miss Steinley was murdered walking with her father in San Francisco.
We've kicked him 5 times. He comes back. And when a young woman is shot walking with her father, with somebody with this resume, but I swear, when I hear the term sanctuary city, the only sanctuary it ought to be is for law-abiding citizens. If we're going to have a sanctuary, it ought to be for them.
President Obama speaking out about America's deadliest enemies. His choice of words getting a lot of attention. Quote, "The analogy we use around here sometimes, and I think is accurate, is if a JV team puts on Lakers uniforms, that doesn't make them Kobe Bryant," end quote.
We've been hearing a lot about the brutality of ISIS as its fighters rampage across Syria and Iraq. ISIS is justifying its kidnapping of women as sex slaves.
The threat we face today from ISIL in the homeland is larger, more disparate, involves a sheer larger number of people than a threat coming from Al-Qaeda.
We know that what appears to be a lone gunman carried out these attacks.
That 4 Marines had been killed and 3 others, including a police officer, sailor, and another Marine, were injured. We need to acknowledge that we're at war and radical Islamic terrorism is our enemy.
After the Fort Hood shooting to this day, the Obama administration calls it an instance of workplace violence.
We will not defeat radical Islamic terrorism so long as we have a president unwilling to utter the words radical Islamic terrorism.
Radical Islamic terrorists.
These new threats of barbaric Islamic terrorism.
What is the difference between a Democrat and a socialist? I used to think there was a big difference. What do you think it is?
The difference between
a Democrat like Hillary Clinton and a socialist like Bernie Sanders.
What's the difference between being a Democrat and being a Republican?
Well, what's the bigger difference? What's the big difference between a Democrat and a socialist? You're the chairman of the Democratic Party. Tell me the difference between you and a socialist.
The relevant debate that we'll be having over the course of this campaign is what's the difference between a Democrat and a Republican?